Good morning and welcome to the Antisocial Behaviour Scrutiny panel meeting. Strange that we're all in the same building, but there we are. I'm sure we can cope and get this sorted out. First of all, apologies for absence. I believe we got about half a dozen. Here's the Morris, which is sadly in hospital. And you have Richard Rowlands, Sam Bennett, Matthew Jones. Anyone else?
Adam Davis and Rebecca Fogarty will be a bit late.
Yeah, I got that. Okay. Disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Anyone? I wanted to declare an interest. In fact, I'm a school governor in Cloyd Primary School.
Cloyd specifically mentioned, Chair.
Sorry?
Is Cloyd specifically mentioned?
No, but because it was education, I thought I'd just declare an interest. So that's the advice I've had in the past, so that's what I took.
I think we've got a dispensation, I think, so we're okay. If you're a local authority governor.
Will you check that in?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know.
Prohibition of reports, declaration of party whips. Any? Okay. Minutes of the last meeting. Page 1 and 2. It's 1 and 2. Could propose and second to correct record, please. I can't do it.
Does anyone just want to put the hand up if they were at the meeting, the last meeting, if they're happy with the minutes?
Yeah. Anybody? Karen Pritchard.
Yeah, no,
Karen?
those councillors, sorry.
No.
Not to worry anyway, we can open, it's fine. It's
No public questions?
We had no public questions. We had a submission from a member of the public, but it doesn't relate to the issues that we're discussing today. So we'll look at that when you're looking at those.
Education, tablet, antisocial behaviour. We have your report. Robert, do you want to kick this off?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think the report in front of you outlines the challenge for the Education Directorate, and of course through the Education Directorate, the schools that we work with and the other partners. And it outlines the various approaches that the Directorate is using to address the various principles that are listed in the report. I don't know if Kate wants to talk through the report first. Kate Phillips from the Directorate, and then perhaps we can have a discussion after Kate has talked us through the report. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, that's okay. Robert, and of course you are the cabinet member for education.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry.
So what I would say before Kate comes in, I know we terminology is terminology. We're dealing with antisocial behaviour. It's about promoting pro-social behaviour, if there is such a word, rather than and as well as dealing with issues that arise from day to day. And I think that's important. This is a preventative approach at its heart. It's not about just responding to issues as they arise, but it's about how we create a culture within our schools and within the lives of our children and young people that is positive and enables them to fulfill their potential across the board, and that is in a safe environment and all the other issues we want to address. So I think I make that point now, tongue in cheek in terms of the title of this inquiry, but I think it is an important point that we need to bear in mind, Chair.
Would you like me to talk through the report? Can I just apologise that you can't
Yes, please.
see me? I don't know what the issue is with my camera. It is on. You can see the background, I'm afraid, but not me. So apologies, you've only got a voice. Okay, so if I talk through the key highlights of the report, I think that the point that Councillor Smith makes is critical to this, really, and I hope that comes through the theme of the report, that very much our approach is about promoting positive behaviours and healthy relationships, and then where things do perhaps go wrong and that's not successful, we look at supporting safe and restorative approaches to remedying some of those difficulties that may arise. So in terms of the way that the report is shaped, what I've done first of all is just to highlight the role of the Directorate, and that is really about our ethos and our policy, our behaviour policy, which is that focus on positive behaviours, healthy relationships, prevention and inclusion. So we want all learners to be able to explore and understand healthy relationships and behaviours. What I've done then is just give a response to the 5 principles to support the inquiry. So I've put principle 1 and principle 2 together because the way in which we outline our approaches are very much through school individual behaviour policies, but they'll be based on our local authority sample policy, which is about providing support for any child who's been affected by perhaps difficult behaviours in relation to their peers. And we have offers such as counselling, pastoral support and our youth worker sessions. We're also supporting schools to become trauma informed, and we're very keen to make sure that that's an approach that's embedded across local authority schools. So we've been able to fund 90 additional places for practitioners, and while it's too early to say at the moment what the impact of that will be, it's very much part of our ethos and our principles, and we're hoping that will have a positive impact within school communities. In terms of the way in which we look at working across agencies, we are very keen to work collaboratively. We recognise actually that we can't achieve anything if we don't work in partnership. So it's really important for us to do that. Our most productive relationships then, for obvious reasons, would be with Child and Family Services colleagues and our representation in early help hubs, but also the work on the CMEC group, the contextualised missing, exploited, trafficked groups, both strategic and operational, are really critical in terms of how we support young people and build those positive peer relationships. The 4th priority around local and national strategic needs, again, that's about our partnership work, and we've recently engaged with problem solving sessions with Welsh Government through the ADU network around improving attendance and reducing exclusion. So one of the things we know, one of the really significant impacts of antisocial behaviour can be attendance at school and exclusion from school. And we know for a number of reasons that over the last few years, attendance has decreased and exclusions have increased. So we're working very proactively to try and seek solutions to that. It's a national issue. It's not unique to Swansea. And that's why seeking those solutions across Wales and indeed the UK are really critical, because we won't find the answers on our own. In terms of opportunities to take responsibility and repair harm, that's very much about our approach. So we are very keen to support a restorative approach to antisocial behaviour and to make sure that schools are able to deliver appropriate interventions, and that we use our data, that we use the information in relation to exclusions intelligently to link support appropriately and to make sure that we tailor that support to emerging needs. So my colleague Helen will have some more specific examples of that, but I can share with you recently, for example, we've noticed a significant increase in exclusions due to young people vaping. So we were very keen to take that to our strategic partners, to our groups, to see what collective solutions we could seek around that, because they won't come from schools alone. We've also got a mechanism, My Concern, which helps us to collate that data and to make sure that we've got oversight of the emerging issues. So In terms of our key challenges, so that one of the questions the inquiry was interested in are what challenges we're facing. As I've said, it's really particularly around low attendance and persistent non-attendance, and then also a rise in behaviours leading to school exclusions. And as I said, this is very much a national picture. It's not unique to Swansea at all. In fact, in Swansea, we are doing relatively well. We're 6th in Wales for attendance out of 22 authorities, but our principle and ethos is that every child matters, every child's attendance is critical, and every day is an opportunity for a child to learn. So you know, we're not satisfied with that we need to do better, and we want to make sure that we increase attendance and ensure that children and young people are attending school where they can receive not only the academic education but also the support for their well-being, their welfare and their pastoral needs. We've got an action plan in place to look at how we can improve attendance and engagement. And I think engagement is a really key word in this, because obviously, you know, children can be present in a school building, but what we need to do is to really support them to engage fully in all of the opportunities that are available to them. And that will help us to truly increase inclusion. We, as we will all be painfully aware, I think, you know, budget constraints are challenging, and we're doing the very best we can within some significant constraints, and that's probably one of our key challenges. I think it's also helpful to note that we're implementing an action plan in relation to peer-on-peer abuse, and that's in response to the 2021 report from Estin, We Don't Tell Our Teachers, and the intention of that piece of work is to both prevent and respond better to instances of peer-on-peer abuse, and that would be including those in relation to the use of social media, which is, you know, a real challenge for us, and that's something that we need to consider carefully. It has quite a significant impact. In terms of our engagement, our current action plan to improve attendance considers ways that we can improve information for families via the use of social media, a better use of our website pages. That's a piece of work that's in development. We recognise that getting that message out in a positive and accessible way is going to be really critical. And we also want to develop our work around sharing schools' pastoral offer with parents, particularly in relation to the focus on developing safe and healthy relationships. So that's an important and developing piece of work. Our information is available on our website, but schools' specific information would be available on their individual websites. And that's important to recognise, I think, that schools will all have their own unique ethos and will all have their own policies suited to their school communities. And so they should be available on their website. We work in terms of reporting. Schools will work with us. We know that our schools use their pupil voice effectively to improve their processes, and we have a team of education officers through the pupil inclusion team and the education welfare service, who are the officers who would usually be supporting with those matters. They're the most relevant team to support with that. In terms of our data collection, there's national data collected around attendance, but we also collate some enhanced data around pupil mobility, and that includes our data on exclusions. We collate that ourselves. We keep our own audit to make sure that we can really do a deeper dive behind some of that data and to understand some of the emerging trends or some of the reasons for any potential increases in exclusions, or indeed where strategies have been effective, what they may be. So we have a range of different data collections, but I think that the information behind that data and understanding what it tells us is really critical, and we use that then to support our strategies going forward. We believe that we meet all our regulatory obligations in terms of attendance, exclusions and safeguarding. And I think in relation to that, then multi-agency working would be absolutely critical. It's a key feature of the work of the Directorate. And we're in the final stages of an inclusion strategy, which encompasses our priorities for working to support vulnerable learners over the next 3 years, and our engagement with partners in multi-agency context is absolutely critical to that. We're fully committed to working in that way. We've also recently considered our response to some of the more significant community events, such as the Mayhill riots, and we've strengthened our practice accordingly. I think, you know, we would always consider that we are a directorate that learns and reflects and amends policy and practice, and so we aim to do that as critically of ourselves then as possible. So we've developed some strong responses in supporting schools and in embedding our practice. We've got officers from across our pupil support team, additional learning needs team and inclusion teams, kind of providing a wraparound for support for schools in when some of those difficult and unexpected community issues arises. And, you know, as the theme throughout this, the focus on prevention is really important, but we also provide a wraparound support where needed, because that's quite critical, you know, when sometimes incidents do occur, and we do need to make sure that we're able to put as much support around a school or a community, a group of young people in those situations to seek that restorative approach and to repair relationships. So in terms of our key objectives in relation to antisocial behaviour, they're outlined in our draft inclusion strategy that will be seeking approval from Cabinet for shortly. Again, the focus is on prevention. It's supporting school communities, children and young people, building safe, healthy relationships. It's kind of, can't emphasise that enough, really. That's very much our ethos. The inclusion strategy for the next 5 years has 5 key priorities, and the 3 that relate most specifically to addressing antisocial behaviour are around increasing attendance, promoting inclusion and supporting emotional health and well-being. So just to finish, I can outline the way in which we work in partnership across the council and with other partners. We're engaged in a number of group strategies and intervention, which include work around community-focused schools, NEET prevention, the use of the Cynnydd Fund and then its transition into the shared prosperity funding, and the strategies used to increase engagement via these funding streams. We have a strategy to reduce emotionally based school avoidance. We've got multi-agency working with CMEC colleagues, our Youth Justice Service and our Early Help Hubs, and the work that we're developing on whole school approaches to emotional health and wellbeing. We're also involved with the regional partnerships, including the Western Bay Safeguarding Board and the West Glamorgan Children and Young People's Board. I guess in terms of our greatest challenges, it's around funding and the implications of capacity for staff. So, you know, we have a strong vision in terms of our approach and our direction of travel, trying to realise that with our budgetary constraints and a limited staffing is challenging, and you know, we recognise that. So I think you know, focuses on prevention and building capacity. The importance of building positive relationships is significant, and you know, it does require more resource than we have available at the moment, but we will continue to focus on trying to meet that as best we can within the current constraints. So very happy to take any questions, Chair, and I'll pause there. Thank you.
First of all, can I say very comprehensive report, very interesting reading, and I picked up a few things myself, but we open it up now on the floor. Questioning. Councillor Cheryl Philpott. Cheryl?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, Kate. When I read through it, so it's very, very comprehensive, and it just goes to show the amount of partnership working that is being done, and I'm sure that we know as governors that there's a lot of support out there. A couple of questions though, one perhaps quite controversial, is that you mentioned that there are significantly more exclusions now than what there have been, and it's related to attendance as well. And my thought is, and this is perhaps where I'm being a bit controversial, is that if a lot of those exclusions are for children who are vaping, because that's been on the increase, that really, for some of those children, a day off or a couple of days off is really something that they want. And I do wonder whether there's a little bit of a move between children, that there's this, oh, well, you know, if you get caught for vaping, then you're going to get a couple of days off. Now, which is really leading into their hands. And I just wonder whether we could have perhaps thoughts about other ways that we could manage that, because I don't want to say that vaping is a low down, but when you consider some of the antisocial behaviours that we do see in schools, then it's not going to be the worst, even though once you give in to something, then obviously things can then, other things can happen. Going back to my thought was, shouldn't we perhaps be looking for confiscation of those, the vaping equipment, which hits the kids and their parents in the pocket? Because if they're not given back until the end of a term or the end of a school year, then I wonder whether that would have more impact on giving in to, well, you're excluded because you've got a vape on you, and giving in to what the kids want anyway. So, as I say, controversial. I leave it to other people to smack me down on that one. But,
Nothing wrong with being provocative.
Pardon?
Nothing wrong with being provocative.
Yeah. But, it gives us the opportunity then to focus on the behaviours that are having much more of an impact on school and social, in the social life within the communities. One of my questions is, because I noticed, what impact are these exclusions having on the pupil referral units? I mean, I was involved many years ago in quite a lot of work on a scrutiny committee within the pupil referral, looking at pupil referral units. But to my mind, I think the challenges are far greater now than what they were 10 years ago. And, I just wonder where we should be looking at, before we exclude, why we're excluding. Is there another way that we could have managed that issue when clearly there's a lot of exclusions for the same thing? So, a bit garbled, I know. So really it is, could we consider on a Swansea-wide basis a policy for exclusion for things like vaping and lower level antisocial behaviour because of the impact, and what impact are we having on the pupil referral unit, which I'm very concerned about, and particularly given that Kate has mentioned that that there is a significant challenge, because you do need more resource than is available. So the other question then is, third question, how much more resource do you need in regards to people, and how can that be managed, even if it's sharing with other departments?
Let's get Kate Phillips, Education, want to come in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Philpott. They're really, helpful thoughts. If that's okay, if I come back on the 3 points that you raised, just to share some feedback, really, in terms of the increase in exclusions. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. We need to be really clear that we don't give a perverse incentive then for children and young people to behave in a way that will lead to an exclusion. Our schools have in their behaviour policies probably what we would refer to as a graduated response, and for most schools those policies are very clearly outlined for children, young people and their families, so they understand, for example, that the first time that an incident occurs, that wouldn't necessarily lead to an exclusion. That would lead to some kind of internal sanction, some sort of restorative action, and exclusions are seen very much as a last resort. It's very much the kind of final step in a series of attempts to try and remedy and prevent a further escalation of behaviours. That's not to say that it doesn't require some really serious consideration as to whether that's working effectively, because we are seeing exclusions increasing. We do know that there are some reasons for that that are quite significant. There's a mix of a kind of complex picture out there in terms of an increase in children and young people struggling to manage regulate their emotions. Emotional health and well-being has been really impacted by the pandemic. That resettling back into school routines following periods of closures, opening and reopening has been really confusing and difficult for children and young people, and re-establishing kind of boundaries and expectations has been a challenge. I think that, you talked about with the vaping, for example, some of the alternative approaches. I think that they are in place, but I think, it's really helpful to consider whether or not there's more that could be done. And, we can certainly work with schools to do that. Our focus previously has been very much on reducing permanent exclusions, because they have real, life-changing impact for children and young people. And I guess in relation to your question about resource, that's where we've targeted our resource in the main, because we know that that has the most kind of potentially damaging impact on a child's life. But perhaps what's been more challenging then is having that resource to target at the work around fixed term exclusions, which can over a period of time mount up and kind of give almost a hidden access to education, reduction in access to education then for a child who's receiving a number of fixed term exclusions. So I think, they're really helpful observations, and they're very much some of the challenges that we're struggling with. You linked your question to our pupil referral unit, and really helpfully so, because what you've identified in terms of our PRU and the increase in behaviours is what we're seeing on a daily basis. So we know now that the children and young people who are referred into our PRU tend to be those where every strategy has been exhausted. What we would like to see is our PRU operate more as a reintegration model and a preventative model, so that children and young people are referred into that provision perhaps a bit earlier, to prevent a complete exclusion, then a permanent exclusion from a mainstream school. So that's very much on our kind of agenda and consideration at the moment, around how we use that resource most effectively in the graduated response, so that we can allow as many children and young people as possible to remain in the mainstream school environment, which is, the fundamental entitlement, really. I hope that kind of answers the question. But some of the challenges you've articulated are some of the ones that we are facing. Absolutely.
I know Robert Smith wants to come in next, but Cheryl, do you want to come back in, or shall I move on to Robert?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thanks, Kate. I mean, I think going back to the pupil referral unit, it was meant to be an integration project many years ago, where children would have that time out and then go back into mainstream school. And one of the issues was that I found at the time was that schools would wash their hands of those children, and we said that is not to be. You need to make sure that child is a pupil, and you keep that pupil integrated back into the mainstream school for other things that are going on. Because when children get rejected and they feel that if they are excluded from their mainstream school for whatever reason, because as you said, there are so many emotional aspects and challenges within some children's lives, that it's just another case of, oh, well, you're rejecting me as well. And I think there's always that, need. And I know that schools work really hard to make sure that children are included. But, that was always a worry of mine, that it's just adding to the feeling of rejection by children. So anyway, but thanks for the report, Kate.
Councillor Robert Smith.
Yeah, and I think Kate has outlined some key points there in response to Cheryl's questions, and I think that those are all valid points. I think one of the things with regards to vaping, I would say, is that we sit and the exclusions for vaping. That's why we need to drill down into this data. It's all right to look at headline data, but you need to look down into what's the underlying trends here, and perhaps look at the vaping and see, well, that may not be as serious as some of the other issues we deal with, but it's nevertheless, and it's features in the exclusion policy. Now, I think schools need flexibility to respond to issues. Vaping may be more of an issue in one school than in another, and they want to crack down on it for a period of time. that's a matter for local discretion. But certainly, you know, we need to try and get consistency moving forward in how schools respond to different issues, and also how get consistency within schools, so that all children and all learners know if they behave in a certain way, then every teacher in that school and every adult in that school is going to respond in the same way to different issues. In terms of the issue with fixed term exclusions, and I think this goes back at least 20 years when Ken Reid and the NBAR review that some of us remember highlighted a number of issues, and this was one of them, which was fixed term exclusions in reality becoming permanent exclusions, because young children, learners were being given repeated fixed term exclusion. And I think that is an issue, not just for ourselves, but across the whole of Wales. And a lot of work has been done in the last 20 years on that. So I think we need to make sure that you know, this is a last resort, and that it is part of a wider package of support for children when they get into difficulties in schools. And in order to do that, again, as Kate emphasised, we need to build the capacity of schools to respond to these issues. It's an issue. These are issues that are on the increase, not just across Swansea, but across the whole of Wales, across the whole of the UK. And I think that we can look at what's caused this situation. But that does mean that we need to build capacity in schools, ensure that all schools are aware of and are confident in using a wide range of approaches to respond to any difficulties when they arise. And as I said, exclusion must be the last resort.
I believe Helen wants to come back in.
Oh, it was just a
Okay.
very quick in response to some of the issues that we're talking about here in terms of permanent exclusion and fixed term exclusion. Kate's right in what she said. The permanent exclusions is where we fixed our resources and where we've really sort of made sure that our resources have been within the last year, and we have seen a reduction of over half. We've had a 50% reduction in permanent exclusions in this last year, which we're really pleased about. We noticed that the fixed term exclusions are beginning to plateau. There are slightly more this year than last year, but very, very slight amounts. And as has been mentioned, I just wanted to assure everyone that the work of the inclusion team is solely about looking at the data in terms of that deep dive and ensuring that fixed term exclusions is where we look at, as well as the permanent exclusions moving forward. Thanks.
Any other? I got one. If there's nobody else I'll come in with the question. Could you just touch on the early help hubs via our education welfare service? Something I don't know if the hubs that we're opening up in the city centre and elsewhere, but I just wondered if you could give me a little bit of information on that.
Do you want me to come in on that, Chair, on the early help hubs? Yeah, and it may be that colleagues from Child and Family Services might want to support as well, but just in terms of where the Education Welfare Service are sitting with our early help hubs. So prior to the pandemic, we restructured our Education Welfare Service, and that restructure actually was concluded, I think, within the week before national lockdown. So although it seems like a long time ago, actually, in terms of being able to embed that work, it's only happened fairly recently. So the idea is that previously education welfare officers were very much aligned to secondary schools and were based there and worked out of those schools for their cluster, that they're still absolutely assigned to schools, and every school has a named, or should have a named, education welfare officer. But we've also assigned our education welfare officers each to an early help hub. So the early help hubs are multi-agency hubs which provide a referral point for the kind of prevention agenda to support families where they are experiencing a range of different needs, and our education welfare officers are linked within those hubs, and they can provide then the link between education and those other agencies, with the idea being that families have a much more streamlined journey into services, and can be stepped up or stepped down into different agencies to provide support as needed. Our education welfare officers would be that education link then in those hubs, and that's the idea behind that way of working. It is relatively new for them, as I say, although the service was restructured in 2020 to embed that way of working is taking much longer, because effectively the pandemic had paused that for a period of time. But I can see Julie's keen to come in and she'll probably give a more coherent answer than I have in relation to that.
That's Julie Davison.
Thanks, Chair. So we have 5 early help hubs across Swansea. We went live with them just as the pandemic kicked in, so we've had a bit of a slow start, it's probably fair to say, so for April 2020. And the main ethos is, as Kate said, is to work early as possible with children, people and families, to take a whole family approach. So from 0 to 18, if they have additional needs, can go up to age 25, helping families to make best use of their resources. And we do a lot of school-based intervention and support, working alongside school colleagues and also bringing health and the police when necessary, but it is about prevention, early intervention, supporting people within their communities and accessing resources within their communities, with the idea it prevents the escalation into statutory intervention, particularly from social services. So working much earlier on in a child and young person's life and helping parents to be the best parents they can be. Thanks, Chair.
I think what's out there is when the schools have been opening, after closing, they open up for all sorts of activities. I've been involved in like a lot of other councillors in work the schools do after they've rung the bell, if you like, and inviting parents in, setting up the parents associations, and even some of them actually sitting down with their children and learning to read because they missed out of school in the younger days. So I'm a big supporter of the schools opening after hours the way they do. I think it's a fantastic job they do. Thank you. Any other questions? No. Alan Jeffrey would like to come in. Councillor Alan Jeffrey.
Thank you, Chair. And Kate, if I can digress away from exclusions at the moment, it's just a general comment. I wonder with the statistics in terms of one of the key challenges regarding your low attendance and the persistent non-attendance, I wonder would that be the case for the older children in schools in the secondary sector, years 10 and 11, bearing in mind that through the pandemic, they were not encouraged, they just couldn't attend school. And I wonder would that have been something that was left within the children themselves, and they tend to get sort of used to the idea of not being in school. And now with the fact that the pandemic is over, younger children are coming through and they're attending school, I wonder would that help to improve attendance in the future? A bit of a positive note, really, because I mean, attendance has always been an issue at school, but I wonder would the statistics show that the non-attendance is more or less a byproduct of the pandemic? Just making that comment. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Kate, do you want to come back here, Kate Phillips? Education?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, just to pick up on that, Councillor Jeffrey, it's an important observation, because what we know is that our patterns of attendance now are completely different from what they were before the pandemic, and we've struggled to get attendance back to where it was before COVID. In terms of understanding the reasons, it impacts across primary and secondary schools, but it would be we will have the data on all of our individual year groups, so we can certainly, you know, look at that and see by year group if that pattern is different. But what we know in terms of the reasons for non-attendance is partly very much what you've outlined around the messaging around not attending. We've had a complete 360 in terms of our messaging. Before the pandemic, we would expect children to attend school. You know, if they had a cold, if they had a headache, we would say be in school. It's really important. Now, you know, messaging has been very, very different, isn't it? We all understood that we keep other people safe by staying away from them if we're poorly. And as recently as Christmas 22, Welsh Government was saying that if children had symptoms of scarlet fever or strep throat, they should be staying home from school. That's a very different ethos from and messaging from the one we had before the pandemic. But we also know that it's impacted on children and young people's emotional health and well-being. So it's been you know, a really challenging time for children and young people, having to have that huge change in their way of living. Has impacted on a lot of children and young people and created a fearfulness. There's a massive increase in anxiety and children not attending school due to what they would refer to as emotionally based school avoidance. So children are being too anxious in some cases to attend. And also we know that families have lost patterns of good behaviour, that period for all of us was difficult and challenging in terms of maintaining routines. And you know, for some families, getting that back has been more challenging, particularly where perhaps they have, you know, a number of young children at home. So yeah, absolutely, there is an impact from the pandemic. I don't know how long it will take to get that back, but the focus of our work is very much around how we address those issues.
Yeah, on a positive note, I think it will improve us as the older children phase out of school. I know we've all been affected in one way or another by the pandemic, but as the older children phase out of the school and move on, I mean, the younger children coming in are more familiar with the day-to-day need to be in school. And I'm sure, you know, most children, they thrive on a kind of discipline, and that is a discipline of attending school on a daily basis. You know?
That's right.
Councillor Robert-Smith.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think we've got the data. We need to interrogate our own data locally, breaking it down, as Kate said, into what's the pattern in different year groups, what's the pattern over time, and also we need to draw on the qualitative data both locally and what we know that Welsh Government is collecting, so that we know what the causes of different types of attendance are, what the causes of different types of behaviour are, and that we use that to inform the strategy moving forward. I very much hope, as you say, Alan, that this is a matter of those children that experience the pandemic moving through the system, and perhaps there will be more stability now for the age groups moving through the system. That's something I very much hope so. But it's something we need to keep an eye on and make sure that we've got appropriate strategies, whatever the patterns are.
Thank you again.
Any more questions? Anybody else want to come in? I'm not saying I'm keen to move on, but if there's no more questions, we can go on to agenda item 7, which is the project plan for the antisocial behaviour. The next meeting will be on the 1st of March at 10 AM, and it will be fetching in Evolve youth offending team, I should imagine. And the one after that would be March the 9th, and it's council outside neighbourhood support unit, public protection services, including noise abatement and place and environmental services. So we've got a busy time ourselves coming up. Next meeting the 1st, St. David's Day. Better get a daffodil. So any questions on item 7?
Those meetings will be back in the Gloucester room.
Sorry?
Those meetings will be back to hybrid. So if you'd like to come to the Gloucester room.
Back to normal. Yeah. If you're happy with that, I can call the meeting to a close, and thank you all very much for your attendance and your input into this meeting. And thank you for the report, which I thought was very good as well. See you all on the 1st of March.
Thanks,
Chair. Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you.